Before it became an Olympic sport, before millions of people knew what it even was, fencing was on the verge of a collapse. No one knew what the rules were, it wasn't popular, and it lived in the shadows of what was an elitist sport that resulted in over 30,000 men dying. This isn't a criticism, nor a comment on how an Olympic sport rose from the ashes only to bury itself again. Fencing still suffers from stereotypes of aristocracy and the upper class. But why has it become noticeably popular, especially among youth? Why is the Olympic dream disappearing, and why is this causing so much outrage and notoriety? We're here to find out. Most people hear about fencing every 4 years, during the Olympics, but other than that, you won't find many people watching fencing like they do with, say, basketball or football. The problem isn't that fencing isn't popular. In fact, it's one of its advantages, which in turn leads to the problem. You see, almost all schools, especially prestigious universities across North America, have a fencing team, which goes back decades. To understand this, we have to go to Manhattan, home to one of the most renowned fencing clubs in the world, Manhattan Fencing Center. Recently, in an interview with New York Times, the founder of the club stated that parents realize that fencing is one of the best sports to put your child in a good university, because each good school, especially Ivy League schools, have fencing. Now, this is where the problem comes in. Many people believe that part of the reason why fencing has grown exponentially, especially in North America, is due to the increasing selectiveness of universities. So I thought, hey, that's pretty interesting and all, but what do the clubs actually say about it? Well, for starters, the first thing that pops up when I visit Manhattan Fencing Center's info section is how fencing helps get your kid into a good university. Okay, let's check it out. Then they give you a whole section to tell you about their students that get in prestigious universities. Chicago, UPenn, Yale, NYU, Cornell, you name it. And it's not only them. Another top fencing club, Silicon Valley Fencing, tells you about how their fencers get in top-notch universities as well. It's the same wherever you go. You see, parents recognize that fencing, compared to other mainstream sports like basketball or football, is much easier to get good results in, as there are less athletes practicing it. This is not to say fencing isn't competitive, but relative to other intercollegiate sports, fencing has less competition. More and more younger fencers may focus instead on athletic scholarships and acceptance into prestigious universities rather than the sport itself. But in all seriousness, does this actually work? Well, we decided to find out. This is Eric, 2004 Olympic gold medalist and a member of the French national team for Epee. We asked him what his journey was like and how he rose through the ranks to ultimately reach a gold medal.
In the way of I started fencing, I was 5. My dad brought me to the fencing club that was really close to our place. So c'était très proche de la maison. Et j'y allais 2 fois par semaine. Usually we had fencing on Friday and Saturday morning. We were doing a pool. These 18 people, we had European champion, world champion, Olympic champion.
When Eric was training for the Olympics, his academy often put the best fencers in France and in Europe in one pool, something like this, to simulate a tournament atmosphere. We then asked him what the differences were between training academies 20 years ago in Europe and now in North America.
In Europe, we have a late development. You don't aim for the category 16, 17, 18, 19. No, you go a bit later. We go for the national team, for the Olympic Games. That's our grail. That's our the holy grail. You know, that's what we want. Here in North America, a lot, I would say, from what I've met, more than 80% wants to an easier access to or a scholarship or at least to a university thanks to that.
You see, when it comes to college recruiters, athletes already have a significantly higher chance of being admitted, even having better odds than some legacy students. Now you can imagine how mad this is making people. And yes, going to the Olympics is something that every parent wants to see the child accomplish. It's one of the greatest accomplishments in the world. But for some, it's not as important as compared to getting into the good university. And this is quite worrisome. But in Europe, this isn't the case.
In France, We don't see the things like this. What matters is to get recruited to the national center. I think nothing has changed. It depends on the culture and everything. I think just the only thing I've seen now, it's thanks to the American fencers' results. There are way more university willing to recruit fencers. Before that was just few. Now it's, as I said, it could be 20 or 30 university recruiting at the same time.
As more and more parents and fencers realize how fencing can act as a tool to get into an Ivy League, it's only bound to get more and more competitive. And the price doesn't come cheap. Usually in fencing, for a 20-minute private lesson each week, it can cost as much as $50 each time. And when you factor in regular lessons, plus travel to local tournaments, which are all self-funded, they can set people back as much as $40,000 per year USD. And there's something else too. Fencers are dressed from head to toe in fancy equipment, and a good set costs around $2,000. I know this is pretty accurate because I'm a fencer myself. A quality sword that competitive fencers use costs around $400, and these things aren't permanent. Swords break, and clothes eventually get worn out. That's why there are stories of parents who spend more than $100,000 per year for their children to pursue fencing. That's 3 times more than the median income in the United States. Only a few centuries ago, only wealthy nobles and royal families could afford to fence. And a few centuries later, it doesn't look quite different. Don't believe me? Well, where better to find opinions than on Reddit, where many say that even going to the Olympics is less of a motivation factor than going to universities. I mean, just look at this. I'm a fencer myself in Vancouver, and believe me, I've seen literal vans pull up to our club with a whole fencing dressing room in it for kids to get suited up. Like, you're dedicating half a van to your kid who apparently needs a whole van to suit up when there's a dressing room inside? Crazy, but alright. But today, fencing is more accessible than ever. Anyone can pick up a sword and start to fence. We don't care if you fence because you want to get into Ivy League, or you fence because you admired Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber skills. This is because real fencers do their talking on the piste. Whether you're 7 years old or 70 years old or on a wheelchair, there's nothing stopping you from picking up that sword and learning how to fence. But even if it's accessible for all, is it truly inclusive in practice? Well, yeah. According to USA Fencing, the national governing body for fencing in the US, says that there were only 50 members competing in fencing in the 1980s who were under 15. Now, there are more than 15,000. And I wouldn't be surprised if half of them went into the sport seeking to get into a better university. So, at the end of the day, pursuing fencing because of university isn't really a bad thing for fencing. And if you enjoy fencing, and universities recognize that, it's a win-win. There's more and more people falling in love with fencing, and it'll continue to grow in the years to come. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and whether you're a fencer or someone who's just interested in fencing, if you've enjoyed this take on the sport. Make sure to subscribe. Each video takes tens of hours to plan, write, film, and also edit. But it's possible with your support. Thanks for watching.